Hi, Frank, and thanks for taking the time to take part in the show. I know you've had a pretty insane schedule lately. How's it going?
Pretty good, thank you. Glad to be on.
And basically, let's get straight into it. In the past 10 years, as a contributing editor at Wire magazine, you've been involved in covering both entertainment and technology, and often a combination of the two. And in the last few years, and especially like in the last couple of years, movies like Avatar that are paired up with game releases and other forms of narrative and marketing have showed how technology is playing a progressively more invasive role in the creation of culture. How do you think that this shift toward high tech has altered the way media is both produced and consumed?
I think it's altering it in pretty fundamental ways, but I think it's also only beginning to change the way things are done. What's happened is, for the past 10, 15 years, the rise of the Internet has really changed the business of media quite a bit, and it's challenged business models of all kinds of media companies, whether they're music labels or newspapers or magazines or television networks. What's happening now is that it's finally beginning to change the form of media as well. It's beginning to change the way we tell stories and, the way we present things to ourselves, to each other, both formally and informally through, sites like Twitter or Facebook.
And on this very subject, you are currently working on a book due for publication next year. And the title is The Age of Immersion, Entertainment in a Connected World. So what's it about, and how did you come up with the concept for the book?
Basically, it's about the idea that the Internet fosters a kind of storytelling that has several characteristics, all of them interrelated. It's nonlinear.
Yeah.
It's participatory, that is, it invites the audience to participate, to take part in some way. As a result of that, it's often somewhat game-like. Yeah. And at the same time, it's more and more immersive. That's sort of a function of all of these. And, really what's happening is that this is still very much a work in progress in terms of how this, new media form is evolving. But you're beginning to see things like alternate reality games, which, play out in the real world and online, and tell stories typically related to, movies such as The Dark Knight. You're beginning to see a kind of merger of games and stories through something like the U.S. version of The Office, which is, of course, a very popular television show, but has also spawned an online game essentially called Dunder Mifflin Infinity, where you sign up to become a virtual employee of the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company. There's a number of things like this that, different ways that people are experimenting with telling stories. For me, my involvement and sort of my realization of what was going on began with an article that I did for Wired on Nine Inch Nails' Year Zero album and an alternate reality game that was part of that.
Sure. And interactivity is a word that is being used a lot now. It's used for 3D, for video games, for music interfaces, but without ending up in a semantics debate. What do you class as being interactive? There's a big debate now. A lot of people are trying to define their own product as interactive. But even 3D is ultimately a passive experience in a way, even though it seems real. What do you define as interactive?
I would agree. I think 3D is a passive experience, but at the same time, it's very immersive, and that's maybe the source of some confusion. I'm not entirely sure, but I think what's important is not just the idea that it's interactive, but that it's participatory. Interactive implies that it's something that you can interact with the with the creators perhaps, or with a game or something like that.
Yeah,
it's sort of like a single player video game might be considered interactive. Participatory is kind of interactive squared. It's really means that you not only interact with with the product itself or the developers of it, but you interact with other people. They're sort of forms a community online, more or less, an ad hoc type of community, where people get together to, talk about these things, develop them, develop ideas about them, that sort of thing. I mean, the television show Lost is a perfect example. Ostensibly, it's not interactive at all. It's just a TV show that you watch. But the fact that they withhold so much information and, in a deliberate fashion, and that it's, presented as a very convoluted story, is a deliberate tactic to encourage people to go online and, and sort it out. So within a year of the show's debuting, you had the creation of Lostpedia, which now has tens of thousands of encyclopedia articles about various aspects of the show. And, of course, you have boards and that sort of thing as well. Yeah. But I think that's the kind of thing we're really talking about here.
One thing that's interesting is that whilst large corporations want to propose a new interactive medium and a participatory one, they also at the same time want to keep a very tight lid on the type of interaction that can be achieved. Do you think this is still part of the struggle between what came first, which is a passive entertainment that you put out there, and what should be coming in a few years, which is a completely interactive experience?
Yes, I do. I think that's a very good point. I think we're at a real inflection point here in the media business in general, and in particular in the way stories are told. And we're coming off of a period of roughly 100 to 150 years of really an industrial production model, whether you're talking about any form of media, newspapers, movies, more recently television and radio. This model is based on the idea of scarcity. There is no more scarcity. Anyone has access to any form of media. The situation is entirely different. Not only does anyone have access to any form of media, but people have access to each other. They, as we were saying earlier, they can, participate, they can talk with one another, they can play some form of active role in the story as it's being told. And, this is really revolutionary. It's not actually the first time it's happened, but it's certainly the first time within living memory of anyone today. Yeah. So media companies were all formed on the industrial model, and it's a very difficult transition for them. It remains to be seen whether they can even make it. I would say that the music companies are very much in debt. I think most newspapers are very much in debt, and we'll see about the rest.
And this is something that has touched you personally as well, because you've worked as a professional journalist in traditional print media for a long time. You started out, I think, was it the 70s at the Village Vanguard? Yeah, and right. Basically, but now you created a blog at www.deepmediaonline.com as a place where you can present some of the thoughts that will eventually make their way into the Age of Immersion. Did you find any resistance towards the medium of the internet, or did you feel like it was a natural progression for you?
I think for me it was a fairly natural progression because this is something I've been writing about for some time. I didn't have a blog before then because, frankly, I had too much work to do. Yeah. Doing a blog in your spare time is not the easiest thing in the world.
No, I know that.
But I think it does raise questions about how journalists are going to get paid for their work. I think, in particular right now, where, these few years are a real transition period because we're sort of moving away from the time when one model works and the next model has really not emerged, and it's not entirely clear what it's going to be. I think that reason tends to indicate that people who add value to the conversation are going to, in some way, get remunerated for it. But the, off-the-shelf, commodity, so to speak, reporting of an event is, that's there's no longer very much value in that because you can get it anywhere. It used to be, for example, with newspapers that every newspaper in America or, England or continental Europe would, report on more or less the same thing. And you read it if you were in that place. Now you can read any paper. I read The Guardian all the time in New York online. I read the Washington Post, the New York Times, of course, Le Monde sometimes. All of these perspectives are available to you, and that fundamentally changes the nature of what it's important to say.
Yeah, because at that point, the competition doesn't only come from your own country in terms of print media, but it comes from, especially for English language publications, from a whole host of other sources. So
yes, exactly. And, there's a sense in which that's really great because it means you have access to the best thought, to the best reporting, and to multiple perspectives that, you really never had before.
You have been involved in covering tech companies since the 80s, pretty much. And your book, West of Eden, that was published in 89 and has been recently republished and is actually available on, I think, Amazon and the Kindle as well, was talking about the way in which Apple sold it over for a while and had a really bad patch that eventually ended up with Steve Jobs being used as a scapegoat and being ousted from the company. You interviewed him extensively for the book, and what was your take on him at the time? And was his incredible comeback in any way foreseeable?
Yes, I think his comeback was foreseeable. I think even more foreseeable at the time was the fact that the course the company had gone on under John Sculley was going to fail. However, at the time the book came out, this was a view I had certainly, and certain other observers, but it wasn't the mainstream view at all. The mainstream view was that Jobs had to be gotten rid of because he was a sort of maniacal tech genius who was completely flaky and undependable and was liable to lead the company down the road to ruin. And Sculley, who the person that Jobs had brought in to be his CEO, and with the idea that he would train Jobs to, ultimately become the CEO himself, instead fired him. What we actually saw was the, bankruptcy of that sort of idea, that a computer company or any technology company like that, any consumer technology company could be considered like an East Coast packaged goods company. Sculley had come from Pepsi, entirely different culture. And he had no understanding of the, of technology or of, what it could do, although he pretended to for a while. By the time Jobs came back, more than 10 years after he had been fired, the company was literally at its knees. It was, on the verge of collapse. And Jobs very quickly righted it. But what's interesting, and I think what most people don't realize, is that the steps he took, right away when he took over in 1997, were exactly the steps he wanted to take when he had the falling out with Sculley that, resulted in his being kicked out of the company. Yeah. Everything that he did then was exactly what he had wanted to do earlier. And I think that the real underlying factor here is that in the 80s, people were really afraid of technology. They were really afraid of computers. They were new. People didn't understand them, especially people in business didn't understand them, and that was the, in corporations, and that was the most obvious market for them. So, IBM and someone like John Sculley made them seem, sort of safe and predictable.
Yeah.
But they also, didn't really know what to do with them, where to take them, or anything.
I read a really interesting article actually on your Deep Media blog about the way Hulu was formed and its backstory basically of the company. And one thing that they did right was to convince content owners to adopt an implementation that didn't bring the television to the internet, but created a medium where the internet was the television. So they made something that was immediately acceptable to internet users. Why do you think it's so hard to convince media and content owners, especially in the music industry, and it has been for the past few years, that the internet needs a completely different approach than other media?
I think convincing anybody that anything needs a completely different approach from what they've been doing is always difficult. I think people are just remarkably resistant to change. But in particular with media companies, whether it's the television networks or the music labels, became wed to a particular way of doing business. And, this way of doing business, entails many factors that are hard to pull yourself away from, especially when, it's not entirely clear where things are going to go, and or even when it is clear, when the new market or the new medium is still emerging and the old one is still profitable. Television networks have a way of doing business that has evolved over 60 years that involves, showing programs, on different windows, first on broadcast,
Sure.
Then ultimately on DVD and so forth. Each of these has been quite lucrative. Yeah. Each of them is quite complicated because they have, affiliate stations, local stations to deal with. In the case of broadcast, they have, retail to deal with in the case of DVD. And to present everything on the internet, which is what you really have to do now, it just seems crazy to a lot of these people. And in the context of how they have been operating, it is crazy. But in the context of what's coming now, what they're doing is crazy. And exactly the same situation with the record companies. Record executives forgot in a way that they were actually selling music. They were in the business of selling shiny plastic discs. Yeah. And these plastic discs were extremely profitable. They were much cheaper to make and much cheaper to ship than LPs had been, vinyl, just a few years before. And yet they charged more for them. To make music available online was to, run the risk of alienating and ultimately endangering, the record stores that sold CDs. And indeed, you see where record stores are now. Almost all of them are out of business. What happened with music was the labels just, waited far too long. And, that was one thing that happened with music. The other thing that happened, of course, was they decided to sue all their customers, which is, frankly, never a good policy.
So finally, you're one of the speakers scheduled to appear at Sounds Digital in London next week. And this is an event organized by the Music Void and X Media Labs. How did you get involved in this event, and what is the main subject of your keynote at the event?
Well, Brendan Harkin of X Media Labs invited me to participate, and I'm very happy to be doing it. It looks like a great event, and what I'm going to be talking about is music marketing and social media, sort of the intersection of all three things there. I'm sort of struck by the fact that as recently as 10 or 12 years ago, when Moby licensed every song on his Play album to one company or another for an advertisement, people were kind of horrified. And now I think that's taken for granted, and like nobody really cares. And in fact, often it's considered a good way to get your music, out in front of people. Sure. And so I'm kind of fascinated by that change in attitude. And so that's kind of what I want to explore. I think it has to do with with changing attitudes toward advertising in general. I think, advertising, it's a little bit like sex. It's something that, we're kind of conflicted about, and we don't really want to talk about all that much. That's the kind of thing I want to get into. So I'm going to, look at different examples, how these attitudes have shifted over the years and what's happening now. And of course, a very big part of what's happening now is, there is no other effective way to get your music out there. Radio is, for all intents and purposes, dead, and it's really only you have to be very creative, very innovative to get your stuff out. At the same time, I think there's just incredible new music happening now, and frankly, much more interesting than what was happening in the 90s and the early part of this decade. So I think we're doing something right.
Yeah, and then there's also almost like an incredible pressure on musicians because, as you've been talking about the narratives and the way people can shape the way a narrative goes, there seems to be almost like you talked about the Nine Inch Nail example, a pressure on people to be able to tell a story from a number of different angles, but sometimes that's hard to do. It's hard to do successfully, isn't it? Because it almost feels forced. Sometimes when people put out a game and put out music, it needs to feel like it's a whole, fundamentally.
Yes, right. I mean, certainly you need to have something to say in order to do that, and there are not many bands that have something to say as coherent and as developed as what Trent Reznor did in the Year Zero album.
Cool. Well, it was great talking to you. And you have a few websites. The first one is frankrose.com. And then there's deepmediaonline.com for the Deep Media blog. And do you have a Twitter account as well?
Yes, I have a Twitter account. It's Frank Rose. And I have a Facebook page as well.
Okay, great. Cool. So I'm sure there's a number of ways people can follow your work and also follow the development of the book. Do you know when it's going to come out next year?
It will be out early next year, January or February. I'm not entirely sure. I'm sort of finishing it up right now. I've turned in a first draft of most of the book, and I'll be, have it pretty close to being done within 2 months. At which point it goes into copy editing. So, there'll be a few last minute things that come as the story develops, but it's been a great experience. It's been really enlightening for me, and I hope for other people as well.
Cool. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, and I look forward to meeting you in London next week.
Oh, great. Thank you, Andrea. I look forward